When you picture vaping, what comes to mind? Probably something pretty sleek, right? Modern. And it comes with this really powerful promise. And that promise is, well, it's that vaping is the smart choice, the clean, less harmful alternative to traditional cigarettes. And look, for someone who already smokes, the science on this is pretty clear. When you stack it up against all the carcinogens in a regular cigarette, vaping is definitely less harmful. It's a legit tool for harm reduction. Okay, but that brings up a huge question, maybe the most important one. What about someone who's never smoked a cigarette in their life? Is vaping a safe choice for them? And that's where this whole picture gets a lot more complicated. So, let's get into it. This thing that started out as a really promising tool for smokers, well, it's kind of morphed into a full-blown epidemic, especially for young people, kids who've never even touched a cigarette. And when you look at the numbers, they're just staggering. In the US alone, we're talking about over 2.5 million students regularly using these things. This isn't some niche product anymore. It's totally mainstream, and it has completely changed the game. So to really get a handle on the risks here, we've got to look past those cool-looking devices and the sweet-smelling clouds. We need to ask, what are we actually inhaling? What's in that liquid that millions of people are breathing deep into their lungs day in and day out? Okay, so the base liquid, the vape juice, it starts with two main things: propylene glycol and glycerol. Now, those sound super scientific, but honestly, you run into this stuff all the time. It's in food, makeup, even medicine. It's actually the same stuff they use to make fog effects at concerts. So on the surface, you think, hey, that seems pretty harmless, right? But here's where the trouble really starts. It's the flavors. Mango ice, cotton candy, blue raz. To get those tastes, companies add this really complex cocktail of chemicals. And because these liquids are usually treated like consumer products, not medicine, they've totally slipped through the regulatory cracks. So what happens? Well, scientists decided to take a closer look, and what they found was, wow. In some cases, they discovered over 2,000 different chemical compounds. And the craziest part? Most of them aren't even listed on the label. And this really gets to the heart of the biggest misconception in this whole debate. A lot of these flavoring chemicals are technically safe for human consumption. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. They're safe to eat. Breathing them in, that's a whole different ballgame. Let's take cinnamaldehyde. That's what gives you the cinnamon flavor. You can eat it, no problem. But when you inhale it, research shows it can actually kill lung cells and even cause genetic damage. Or how about benzaldehyde? That's your cherry and almond flavor. It's totally fine in your food, but breathe it in, and it's a severe irritant to your entire respiratory system. But the danger goes even deeper than that. It's right there in the name we use for it. We call it vaping, right? Which makes you think the cloud is just harmless vapor. But scientifically speaking, that's just not true. The correct scientific term is actually aerosol. And trust me, the difference is huge. Vapor, like the steam coming off a kettle, is just a gas. An aerosol, though, is a mix of tiny little liquid droplets and solid particles that are all just hanging out in the air. So yeah, think of it less like steam and way more like a fine mist of chemicals. Here's a really powerful way to picture it. Imagine taking a can of body spray, a warm, sticky body spray, and just inhaling it. That's a lot closer to what's happening. It's not clean air. It's a substance, and it's coating your mouth and your throat before it makes its way deep down into your lungs. And it gets worse. The actual process of vaping adds even more danger. When that chemical cocktail gets heated up, it actually creates brand new substances that we know almost nothing about. Plus, that little metal coil that does the heating, it breaks down over time and it leaches heavy metals straight into that aerosol you're breathing. We're talking about stuff like lead, chromium, and nickel. And nickel is a known carcinogen when you inhale. So, what does all this do to your body? I'm not talking about 20 years from now. I mean, what happens right away when you inhale this aerosol full of unknown chemicals and heavy metals? Well, a lot of people who start vaping get a cough or feel short of breath, and they just kind of brush it off, thinking, oh, my body's just getting used to it. But that is a really dangerous way to think about it. Those symptoms, that's not your body adapting. That's your immune system screaming for help. It's literally going to war against billions of these sticky foreign particles. And this constant battle inside your body creates chronic inflammation, which leads to something called oxidative stress. The best way to think about this is like rust. Seriously, just like a piece of iron starts to rust when it's left out in the rain, your body's cells start to rust on a microscopic level. And that damage makes your cells weaker, which basically just opens the door for all kinds of diseases. And this brings us to the scariest part. the biggest unknown. We can see the short-term damage, sure, but what about the long game? What are the effects going to be in 10, 20, or even 30 years?
It's the question on everybody's mind, right? Does vaping cause cancer?
And the only truly honest scientific answer we have right now is probably. But it's just too soon to know for sure. I mean, cancer can take 20 or 30 years to develop, and widespread vaping is still pretty new. But all the signs we're seeing in the lab, the cell damage, the genetic mutations, that oxidative stress we just talked about, they're all pointing in a very, very worrying direction. So here's the reality of the situation. It feels a lot like the early days of cigarettes, when movie stars made them look glamorous long before we knew about the devastating health effects. We are, right now, in the middle of one of the biggest medical experiments in history. And if you vape, you are a part of that experiment. The final results, well, they won't be in for a very long time.
And while those long-term risks are a mystery for everyone, they are especially dangerous for teenagers. Think about an adolescent brain. It's like soft clay, still being molded. When you flood that developing brain with the massive hits of nicotine you get from vapes, it fundamentally changes how it's being built. It literally rewires the brain's reward system, and that can lead to lifelong problems with things like attention, impulse control, and even mood disorders.
So, when you step back and look at all of this, you're left with this incredible paradox. Vaping isn't just one single story. It's actually two completely different, competing stories happening all at once. Here it is. For, say, a 40-year-old who's been smoking heavily for years and switches to vaping, that's a public health win. It's a huge step toward reducing harm. But for a 15-year-old who never would have dreamed of touching a cigarette, it's a public health disaster. It's a gateway, an on-ramp to a powerful, lifelong addiction to nicotine, all wrapped up in a package that tastes like candy. And that forces us to ask a really tough question. Let's say 10 or 15 years down the road, the data comes in and it confirms all our worst fears. We're looking at a massive health catastrophe. Who's responsible? Is it the companies that pushed these products with flavors that were so obviously aimed at kids? Or is it the governments and the regulators who kind of just let this new thing explode onto the scene before we really knew the long-term risks? Or, when it comes right down to it, is it just up to the individual? There are no easy answers here, but it's definitely something we all need to think about.